Hello, whoever is watching. Welcome to my channel, welcome back, whatever it is. So I figured I would try out a new idea I've had for quite some time, and that is a virtual-esque version of a book club on my YouTube channel that I would just share with the internet and whoever wants to discuss and engage in reading topics and books and such. I used to think of book clubs as a gathering of middle-aged women sharing their drought-ridden erotic interests in the newest subpar romance novel. But my inspiration for this was wasn't too far off, but a little different. And that is because my best friend, her mom has her own book club with her 3 other town moms, and they just gather around maybe one night a week with a glass of wine and whatever baked good each person brought, and they just kind of chat and relax and talk about what they've been reading, whether it's different or the same book or whatever it is, and they just it's like a social gathering that you're actually able to share in aesthetic and ideas and art. Which brings me to my point, which is not just the constant content creation that is YouTube basically, but trying to bring something of artful substance or literary substance to my channel. So I may not have my own wine and baked goods for my book club. I do have my water and banana chips, so that's gonna have to do. That is the type of book club I will be giving, if that has any indication. Dried banana chips, plain water. No matter how many times I ask my best friend to give me the time and place of her mom's book club meeting, I have yet to get my invitation, which is a little strange, so I figured, alright, might as well start up something of my own. And so that brings me to the circle of what I am doing and why, and as such. I should first introduce myself as what sort of reader I am and what sort of books and authors. For starters, my favorite author is Albert Camus. I have recently discovered a great interest in the author Bret Easton Ellis, which is actually who I'm going to be talking about today. Besides those two authors, I also really like Kurt Vonnegut, Franz Kafka, Virginia Woolf, Tolstoy, Chekhov. I can pretty much just go through my whole bookcase that is facing me. As you might notice, that these authors that I've listed tend to write more on the darker side of literature, whether it be existentialism, nihilism, if I ever say that word right, I'm not sure. Though all while getting sort of lost in satirical undertones of their literature, which I love. So basically with each book club that I put out, it's going to be about books that whatever instill a emotion in me and really give me a fire of intention. And that's what I really look for in the books that I'm reading and what I can actually talk about with whoever's watching. But basically the purpose of my doing this book club is that I want to engage with a community of other readers and people who appreciate the literature that I appreciate. So that is why I invite whatever viewers to give their own input, whether they've read this book or not, or other novels by the same author, or even if you have a certain book that you've read that you think I should also read and make a video about. And that's really a great part of YouTube that is sometimes lost, this sort of bridging of ideas and intellect. So I want to start my first installation of this book club with Rules of Attraction by Bret Easton Ellis. Here we are. Can you see? Very nice. As you can see, it's a very joyful color. It's just full of happiness and joy. Yeah. As Ellis usually writes. But yeah. If you guys know him from American Psycho, you know what I'm getting at. But the brilliance is so much still there. Rules of Attraction is the 4th book I've read by Bret Ellis, and ever since I finished it maybe about a week ago, it still has me in like this state of recollection. And I think the main reason being is that the plot of the book follows the far from sober campus of an elitist college in New England, and I began to almost fear the connections I was making to myself and my collegiate classmates. In the book, the three main characters, Sean, Paul, and Lauren, sort of live in their own world on campus. They are involved in their own sort of disconnected love triangle within sex, collegiate, rape, drugs, alcohol, rock and roll. It creates a sense of a bubble within the story and even on campus, which I sort of feel on my own New England college campus, because we're so disconnected from the world and even from each other. Sometimes from ourselves, but mainly from each other, which is so easy to get just to fall into that hole. And even it can transcend into disconnect from ourselves and who we are becoming, because this is such a turbulent time in our lives, and we're just through these 4 years, we don't know where we're going, what we're doing really. And Ellis beautifully demonstrates that in his representation of this 80s youth. With these three main characters, Sean, Paul, and Lauren, while reading, I got the sense that they don't really quite like themselves or who they're becoming, or who they've become. And in my connections to self and world, I think this is a very fair narrative for the youthful dilemma of self-loathing and self-denial and doubt and just kind of being unaware of where you are in the world. Yeah. And in the novel, none of it really quite gets absolved. It's as if they remain in this sort of limbo throughout the drunken parties, drugs, alcohol, hangovers that last for days. Though in the book, Ellis gives a voice to a wide range of characters, and that sort of makes me think if he created a basis of telling a story, his own story, of his time as an undergraduate at Bennington College. Really, no characters in this novel are capable of creating emotional connections with each other. They can't really grasp this humanistic value in their youth. And this brings me to the point that I have thought about the most throughout while reading and the days after I flipped the last page. Towards the end of the novel, when Sean pleads with Lauren, the perceived love of his life, that he wants to get to know her, she crushes him by saying that he will never ever get to know her, that no one ever gets to know anybody. And then Sean goes on to give the same response to the cries of Paul, who inadvertently fell in love with Sean, though Sean cannot even allow himself to feel such depth. But I agree that these characters will never be able to get to know each other, because they are not the type of humans who could, because they live their lives in a daze of drunken haze throughout the late Reagan 80s. Love, sex, drugs, and rock and roll, and that's kind of the mantra of the novel in a way that I perceive. And as to really knowing someone, I don't know how many people at my college who I actually know, and I don't know how many people actually know me. And even if I am able to really kind of open myself up to allow people to come in and really know, even though what does that really mean? How do you know someone? Because we're always just changing and we're going 10 steps back and like leaps forward, and I can barely keep up with myself. How do I expect other people to really know me? Which I think is a myth that we have kind of romanticized through film and novels and societal art and such. Because you're expected that if you truly love someone, you're supposed to truly know them, even though you can't. Even though I believe Ellis is saying that, where you are now, you're going to be different, and no one can really know you, who you are, never ever. Though some may argue that these youthful characters in the novel are just uncomfortable with themselves because they're young and stupid and just experimenting and doing all the things that you're quote-unquote supposed to do, supposed to try in college. But I don't think Ellis is given that sort of narration. He did not write this whole novel just about youthful discomfort. I want to believe that he wrote about himself to show us a part of his life during that period in the late 80s. Like where he was as a person, a writer, and a young guy. and that he was real with his words and his world that he gave us. I realized that it might be difficult for some members of the audience to connect with and accept and love characters who don't come with a happy ending, or even remind themselves of the grotesque elements of their own selves. But Ellis brings us back to an era back when I believe he was in his youth, a time when people sort of were okay with and accepted their pessimistic fate of the world that movies, film, art depicted. And I really appreciate that of Bret Ellis, which is why I've become increasingly interested in him as both a writer and an actual person. In Rules of Attraction, like his other novels, Ellis leaves us with loose ends and sort of unfinished business, which I believe we can really elaborate with. It doesn't have to be a dead end. We continue the story with the new Sean's, Paul's, and Lauren's that we have adopted into our own consciousness, which is what I appreciate from reading so much, is that each book that I consume, I also consume ideas and plots and characters and personalities and a whole plethora of elements. And now we close off with a void of emotions, though with a well of thoughts and ideas. But that is rock and roll. Deal with it.